don't bury your head in the sand. If you don't give any guidance, probably everyone's using ChatGPT or Anthropic or Llama or something on another window. Give realistic guidance. If the thing you're worried about is leaking your customers' data, like, give clear guidance. Don't copy and paste customer data into a ChatGPT field until we have a contract. But if you want to use it to help you rewrite an email, go for it.
Welcome to Privacy in Practice, the podcast where we bring you the latest insights, practical solutions, and real-world stories from the world of data protection and privacy. I'm Kelly Dupree.
And I'm Donnie Strachen. Privacy in Practice is brought to you by VeriSafe, your trusted partner in privacy and data protection. In this podcast, we dig into the challenges and opportunities in privacy compliance, from navigating complex regulations to building a sustainable privacy program that works for your business, not against it.
So let's jump in and get practical with privacy. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Shane Witnov to the podcast, not only because he's a passionate thought leader and scholar in the privacy and AI policy space, but also because he's a friend and travel buddy, even to South Africa. Shane currently serves as an AI policy director at Meta, where he focuses on the intersection of technology, privacy, and public policy, particularly and relevantly for this conversation, in the realm of artificial intelligence. Since joining Meta in 2015, he has been instrumental in guiding the company's approach on AI and other issues, ensuring that innovations are developed responsibly and ethically.
Prior to his role at Meta, Shane was a law clerk and then gained valuable insights through internships with organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation. With his deep expertise in privacy law, ethical implications of technology, and a long-standing interest in First Amendment rights, Shane brings a wealth of knowledge and perspective on the pressing issues we face in data privacy and AI governance today. We're excited to have him join us for what promises to be an engaging conversation.
So Shane, I know because of law school that you were interested in privacy. Like, as long as I've known you, I feel like you've been interested in privacy. I think you might have been the first person I ever met who was interested in privacy. What first sparked your interest?
I think my interest in digital civil liberties goes back to high school, actually. That was like earlier internet days. There was lots of like, what does free speech on the internet look like? And I somehow got involved in this like speech contest on like, what amount of censorship should be on the internet. And I was kind of like appalled that everyone else that was giving their talks was like pro censoring speech on the internet. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, that's not what we should be doing. And so that was kind of the start of my, I think, like interest in digital civil liberties. Another odd, like, milestone in that road was Will Smith's Enemy of the State. It was this kind of bizarre movie where like the NSA goes rogue with their crazy unrealistic satellites and are spying on everyone and taking over the world. And it's like, this seems bad. So I think that was around then is when like the interest started, and then kind of continued as I moved into technology fields and was starting to see how policy was influencing and shaping kind of the early like .com boom and what was coming afterwards in like not very informed ways. Like I'm on the policy side now. I think it's super important for policymakers and stuff to be involved, but there was like just a real lack of understanding of the value and how the tech worked and what it was bringing. And so that kind of further inspired me as someone coming from a tech background to want to do more in this space, and particularly like in the privacy space.
You've mentioned what you're doing currently. So you're at Meta at the moment, but how did you get there, and what is keeping you there?
I never thought I would end up at Meta. So in law school at Berkeley, I got to participate in the Samuelson Clinic. And through that, I worked with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Center for Democracy and Technology, the ACLU of Northern California. It was an amazing experience. And I was like, very much in the digital civil liberties focus area and thinking. I wrote like a couple papers critical of Meta and social networks generally. But I had known, I did big law for a bit. I knew I wanted to go in-house eventually. And then as I started looking into Meta, this really interesting role came up that like wasn't product counsel, which is thought which I thought was what I was looking for, but that was because I like didn't know this role existed on the policy team, where we sort of got to do my role is to do big picture, like where is the world, what's the world's trajectory on privacy issues, and how can we meet where that's going, and how can we do education about what we're trying to accomplish. And we talk about internet, we're trying to drive convergence, basically. How do we like drive convergence between where, not what the law is today, but where the law is going and the technology we're building, and how do we have those like meet in a place where everyone thinks we're doing reasonable things. We think the regulations and stuff we have to meet are reasonable. And so like, that's just like a fascinating place to be, and doing it at Meta, where I'm like on the cutting edge, impact at this point, impacting 3.5 billion monthly active users or something like that. So like the scale of the work. And then the people I'm just surrounded with, like it's an amazing team. I was a big skeptic coming in, and, you know, the company gets a lot of criticism. Some of it is warranted. I think a lot of it is overblown, and it's a lot of like very thoughtful people making hard decisions about the best way to operate a very complicated business where in many cases no one's going to be happy no matter what they do. And so trying to navigate that while providing like enormous value for people.
That's fascinating. Your role now focuses on AI, and that's a lot of what we want to talk to you about. That concept of convergence of the laws and the practice. I mean, that's fascinating. And I mean, it makes sense, and certainly not the first time we've heard it, but just thinking about it in the role in your seat, the US state laws are so different in some ways than the GDPR. And something that a lot of our clients battle with is, do they take what we call the whack-a-mole approach and sort of deal with each law on its own, or do they take a sort of universal high-water mark approach? That must have been something you all decided. I know you probably can't discuss sort of how Meta wanted to handle that.
I can't go into details, but yeah, I mean, like, I think the answer is both. Like, you have to decide what is right for you as a company. You have to decide what is right for your users. You have to decide what the right is approach. That should be global. And there's a lot of the foundation of all of these laws that are like common sense. These are the right privacy practice, like transparency. Yes. Like you should clearly do that. Like reasonable and secure data privacy practices. Like, yes, these are things you should do. You know, the details of how you dot I's and cross your T's for your DPIAs, like, do you need to provide those in California if they don't require them? Well, no. Like, that's serving like the letter of the law in Europe. You should go follow the letter of the law where you have to follow the letter of the law. But I think like, you know, with the idea of the convergence we're thinking about is like, what's the right approach for people? Like what's actually adding value? And that's something we talk about a lot internally is like, are we being asked to build a toggle that 5 people out of 3.5 billion people are going to use? Or are we being asked to build a toggle that 20% of the population wants to use? And like, those are totally different conversations. If it's 5 people, we'll build it where it's required. But like, we already get complaints that our controls are too complicated. We like don't want to add extra confusion. But if it's really valuable and it's something people want, then that we want to offer that globally. And we want to offer that before the law requires it. That's just something we want to build. And ideally, we build it in a way where we get ahead of where the regulation is. So then when the regulation comes, we can point to like, here's a great solution. And ideally that gets incorporated in as a best practice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's amazing how many people talk about in these conversations, talk about privacy as common sense. It seems so complicated, right? I mean, the DPIA is a perfect example, right? It's a messy spreadsheet program, however you do it, with a whole bunch of different fields. But so I think it can feel to many people like privacy is full of a lot of rules and dotting I's and crossing T's. But the more people we talk to, and I think certainly our experience, Donna, you and I, is that a lot of it is common sense. A lot of it is sort of these core principles that if you can align your practices with those core principles, you're going to be okay. You might not be perfect, but you'll be okay. And that's a good kind of guiding star, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I do have to say, like, the whack-a-mole thing is real. I think as of a couple months ago in 2025 so far, and we're not very far in, There were over 700 AI bills in the States. If only a tiny percentage of those pass, like, Meta has an enormous budget. We have a ton of people. We will figure out compliance. But that is crazy expensive. Like, that is really hard to navigate.
And it's, as you rightly point out, if Meta is struggling with all the resources that it can afford to throw at it, then the average company is also very much struggling. And it's very hard. It's an exciting time with AI. There's a lot going on. And I think that on the one hand, it's frustrating for companies that want to start using it and are not sure where, as you say, how to get in front of the law, because the laws aren't written. I think it is still an exciting concept. So let me ask that. Let's start with the exciting stuff. So from your perspective, and I know you were just at the AI conference in Paris, there's a lot of exciting stuff that AI is potentially capable of. So what about AI is exciting kind of to you personally?
So, I mean, it comes with the caveat, like, there's a lot of hype out there. So I don't want to be another hype machine. I do think, like, it has enormous potential. It's the potential, it's the next computing platform. It is potentially going to change a lot of things. It already is really helpful in a lot of spaces. There's just like lots of your daily activities that having an assistant or having something that can do a level more than a Google search can really make things a lot easier for you. And it's like funny things that you wouldn't think about. Like, my sister-in-law couldn't have dairy or eggs or a number of other restrictions for over the holidays. That means a ton of substitutions in recipes. You can go look up each of those substitutions individually, or AI was amazing for this. I'm like, here's the recipe I want to cook, suggest substitutions. No, that has too much fat in it. Can you iterate on that? No, I'd like to use this. Can you reiterate it? And like every time you would re-update it, rechange all the ratios. Like, it was amazing. And that's like completely minor. And I love to cook, but like that was super cool. And there's just like a bunch of those. Like, you want to plan a trip? Great. I was looking into new schools, potential new schools for my daughter. Like, give it the criteria. Please build me a sheet of cost, due dates, strengths, links to like statements of their philosophy. And like, it'll put that together in 2 minutes. And then you got to go verify it all. Like, there may be errors. It may miss things. But like, that's an amazing starting point that you can work from. And so I think there's just like any kind of general question you have or how I should do it, like, it's a worthwhile place to start. And like, that's just what we have today. And then like the deep research things that have started to come out, like the level of detail is amazing. And, and so like, that's in kind of like the mundane thing. And the bigger picture thing, like material science is taking off with this. It can draw connections between many different papers and propose like novel materials to try and build for different things and different challenges we're trying to solve in the world. There's lots of exciting stuff in medicine. Like, everyone jumps to the pharmaceuticals. I think that's exciting. But there's a ton of like really mundane stuff. Like, no one can read doctors' handwriting and we need to digitize it. Like, these models are actually like really, because they can pull in more context. Like, they're not just doing character recognition, but they build character recognition on top of something that like is built on top of a medical database and is built on top of like how you structure sentences. And it turns out it'll do a really much better job of transcribing that, or oral or dictated notes and stuff. Or you need to fill out these complicated forms. Like, let me create a really sophisticated wizard that can help you fill out your insurance forms and other things. There's like all these mundane tasks that if you're an expert in it, great. But if this is the first time you're encountering it, it's really hard. And like, an AI can play a really powerful role in helping kind of simplify those types of things. I think there's lots of low-hanging fruit in addition to like, changing the way we do science and, driving like global efficiencies across a bunch of different domains. But yeah, and there's a lot of like excitement about it too. Like one of the things we have at Meta, we have like a couple different sides to our AI work. We have our foundational models, our Llama series of models that we're open sourcing. Like at this point, we're over 1 billion downloads of our foundational models. So those are people taking the raw open source models and taking them to play with it, which is just like mind boggling. They haven't been out that long. And then the number I actually love even more is we're at over 200,000 derivative models have been shared back to the community. So that's taking our models, refining them, further fine-tuning them, specializing them for different purposes, and then like re-uploading them to Hugging Face or other places saying like, here's what I've built. Maybe you want to use it. Maybe you want to build another business on it. Maybe you do want something else. And so like the uses the broader community is seeing is really exciting.
I think there are such exciting things around AI, but you can't ignore the fact sort of there's a lot of chatter. People are nervous. They're worried where this is going to go. What's the AI going to do to us or with us one day? But I think most sort of reputable organizations are thinking about that and they are trying to do the right thing. But when it comes to these ethical considerations, how do you handle that? Have you created an internal framework with sort of a bottom line, sort of a line that you won't cross? How do you approach this? Because, you might develop something really cool and something that's really going to change things, but it might have some dark downside. How do you handle that clash if that happens? Do you have sort of like a guiding set of rules saying, we won't go further than this, or if this is what we face, this is how we're going to handle it?
So yes, we have all that. I think like one of the things to be careful of in all these conversations is to be careful about AI exceptionalism. There are points in which it is different, but in many or most cases, if you replace AI with technology, like it's a technology, like you guys have been doing privacy, we have risk frameworks. Those risk frameworks are pretty good. Even if you look at, so NIST has their general risk framework that is generalizable. And then they created, a special use case for AI that is built on top of that. It's the same. So like we have leveraged a bunch of the privacy frameworks we have built over time. We're using that as our general like governance program as part of AI. But many of the questions are not particularly new. We think about privacy and security and data use. Like you need to think about that with any technology you use. There's some, particular issues you might need to think about in the AI space based on like how it uses data, where you're getting data from. But like broadly speaking, it's the same set of issues. You need to think about robustness and reliability. Like, are you using this technology in an appropriate way? How are you using the technology? Is it safe for your users? Go out and do red teaming, go out and talk to third parties, go out and imagine the worst case scenarios. And like, how does your technology gonna work in that situation? Are you transparent about it? Are you communicating how you should expect people to use the product, how the product works, et cetera, and then have an accountability and governance framework around it. And so like, there are unique considerations. So like one thing we haven't done for most of our other technology is we developed what we call our frontier AI framework. And this was something that came out of the Korea Safety Summit that preceded the Paris one, where a bunch of companies like signed on that were developing frontier models to basically like lay out the standards by which they are developing and evaluating their frontier models. And so we've published it. All the leading labs have published their frameworks. And so those do include things like measuring the uplift of our model's ability to facilitate the development of chemical or biological weapons, or basically like taking the existential risks seriously and developing a framework by which we can evaluate and measure them. And so like chemical and biological weapons is not something I thought about normally in my life when I was wearing my privacy hat. That's a new hat I've had to learn to wear. So like, I don't want to say there's like nothing new, but I think there's a lot you can leverage from your existing risk framework work and bring that to bear into the AI space as you think about and evaluate what you're doing.
Yes, it's still actually just about doing the right thing, I suppose. The technology might be slightly different, but there's still sort of this corporate gut feel, if I can call it.
Yeah, it's doing the right thing, and And back to what I say, like the driving the convergence piece, it's about talking to people too. Like that's how you check your own work. Like we have a bunch of really smart people on the inside who are like spending all their time thinking about this, developing evaluations, etc. But then it's also super important to go talk to other people and make sure you're not missing things. And so we have a bunch of experts that we work with. There's a bunch of third-party organizations like ML Commons, PAI, the Frontier Model Forum, et cetera, that we also work with to help try and develop like standard approaches to these questions, to the hardest questions.
Do you ever involve users in that? Because I know when you do a DPIA, sometimes you involve the actual data subjects to get their input if it's a super sensitive situation.
There's lots of different ways we approach it. So like my role sitting on the policy side, I am mostly talking to policy stakeholders. Like those are my main constituents. So those include like the expert groups, but it also includes people in political circles. We work, part of what we're doing when we're developing open source models is we're building for the developer communities. So our partnerships team and our marketing team and those folks, like they're all out trying to understand what the developer community wants, how they're using it, how they're going to use our product. And then we also have a bunch of like UX researchers, UI designers, and they're traveling around the world studying and doing focus groups on how our users are using their products. We've also done a number of basically like deliberative democracy forums. This is something like Stanford has helped pioneer, and we've done them in partnership with them, where we bring in essentially stakeholders from around the world and then run these pretty rigorous process of a forum where you ask these like hard future looking questions where you do a fair bit of education as part of it. And one of the kind of like surprising things you get out of this is if you like get people to commit to enough time, you can actually drive like quite a bit of consensus on issues that like seem derisive. And it's not like all the time, but things that, at first glance you'd get like 50-50 or no one knows the right approach. Like if you walk people through it, if you give them time, you tend to get more towards like a 70% plus convergence of like generally people think this is the right way to approach this when they think about it thoughtfully. And so like that's really helpful guidance too. So we do things like that.
And when you say people, you're talking about other competitors, you're talking about other people making AI systems, you're talking about politicians, or maybe not politicians, regulators, or industry leaders, experts. It's a wide range of perspectives in that fact pattern.
Yeah. So the deliberative democracy process, I would say that's like it's not a jury, but it's like that. It's like it's people off the street. We're trying to get like normal people and what do they think. Like that's kind of what that group is targeted at. We do other things. We do focus groups on heavily policy aware people or people that are in like policy circles because we want to know what they're thinking, and that helps shape certain things we're doing. But there's also, we want like the everyday user in the US, we want the everyday user in different parts of Europe, we want the everyday user in different parts of Africa. So like we're looking globally and looking across different populations to understand needs, wants, concerns, etc.
That's fascinating. The data from that, sort of from a social science perspective, must also be fascinating. And it's great. It's in sort of a modern world like ours, it's nice to, and I think common sense, to find situations where when you sit people down, you actually have a sort of a framework for discussion. You can actually get to consensus. That's quite interesting, actually, especially in something as you say, potentially divisive as AI. That's quite cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting anecdote or anecdote to like some of the things that are going on and the derisiveness we see in like the normal day-to-day discourse. But that if you get reasonable people seriously committed to giving time and studying an issue, that it's there can be a lot more areas of alignment.
Yeah, it's quite cool. One thing our clients consider often is not necessarily their own internal use of, or building, I should say, or creation of any kind of AI, but often vendors' use of AI on their data or their clients' data. And often what happens is like ADP, for example, the benefits payroll provider will launch some neat new features. Sometimes they're obviously AI, sometimes they're not. And our clients are nervous about their team members using AI without having that sort of appropriate framework in place. One thing you said earlier that I really liked was, when we were talking about being careful about AI exceptionalism, you said in many ways it's still just privacy, security, data use. And I thought those three words were really both correct and helpful. Is that kind of how you think about evaluating anyone's AI system? If you're a business, I know this is not as much your role at Meta, but if you're a business and you're trying to build out an AI framework or some guidelines or some structure for your team, should it basically be privacy plus, essentially, sort of the same privacy, cybersecurity plus the same structure you have for considering other data use, just, understanding that it's just in some ways a different use? Or is there something unique to AI that you think people should be considering in addition to sort of the standard privacy considerations, as you said, the NIST risk framework, security stuff, all of that?
I think it's more than privacy, but I'm not sure that it's unique to AI. I think the other big bucket is the robustness and reliability. Like, are you using this for the right thing? And like that ties in tightly to some of the privacy questions. Like, do you have the appropriate data set for the questions you are asking of the data? Like, are you making decisions that have legal consequences? Like, if so, do you have the right protections in place? And I think like those are more like traditional privacy questions, but I think they like get into the robustness and reliability. Like, is this safe and appropriate for the purposes for which you are using it? And so I think that gets to when you're, vendor comes out with some new thing, should your employees, and it's AI, and should your employees use it? Like, I think I wouldn't worry overly much about the AI they have, but they have some new technology they are offering. What do you need to give to use that technology, and what are you getting out of that technology, and are you using it in appropriate ways? And what kind of education do you need to do, and how are you able to do it, and how do you limit your liability? So one big consideration is like, will this be externally facing? Like, are your clients going to interact with it, or is it internally facing? You have a lot more flexibility internally facing. If it's external, it's representing your brand, and you got to think about like, could someone think they'd formed a contract with this AI? Like, that might be something you'd worry about if you're selling something and the AI undersells it, below cost. That may not be what you want. And like, there should be guardrails on all this stuff. And like, there's ways to do that. And that's going to be a really common use case, and people are already doing it. I'm not saying like that's bad, but just like thinking through the uses. And I also think like also being a reasonable employer, if you ban all uses of AI internally, like they may just go use an external one. So like you should be clear on what uses are appropriate, what your concerns are, and then help enable them. I think it is a mistake to run from it right now. I think these will be tools that will make your employees more efficient. You should be encouraging the use and just be doing it in a thoughtful way.
I have a different policy question. So the EU AI Act, I guess, is sort of the big one out there at the moment, and that follows a risk-based approach. But you've mentioned sort of hundreds of bills coming out in the States. I guess it might be an unfair question, but where is policy going? Do you think the States will follow the same risk-based kind of approach? Is there going to be a divergence? Because it's difficult for organizations to try and get a sense of all these regulations out there and how they typically work and what they typically require. Do you think there's going to be some kind of alignment at some stage, or is it going to become even more complicated?
I think it's going to become more complicated most likely before it becomes less complicated. I'd certainly hope that's not the case, but just it's hard to predict. I do think a risk-based approach is the right way. I think the notion of saying a certain capability in the abstract is something we don't want. Just like doesn't make sense. Those like 10 to the 26 flops was thrown out there, and that was like pretty quickly like we've surpassed it in some places and it's safe. And also, if what you're worried about is certain chemical or biological weapons, you can make a much less than a 10 to the 26 flops that was specialized on a certain data set and probably get the same performance. And also the general trend when people came up with that was it was going to be bigger and bigger and bigger was how you got more powerful. And now there's a bunch of new techniques that are making smaller models very performant. And so, but it also just logically doesn't make sense. These are dual use technologies. A model that is, and this is one of the challenges we're all going to have to grapple with, a model that is really good at chemistry, that is going to help us develop novel drugs, novel materials that are going to be really important for development, for climate change, for any number of things, is probably going to be good at developing toxic chemical agents. And so that's an area of a bunch of research. We need to figure out ways to manage that. But so just because you get to a certain performance threshold, it's inherently dangerous, I don't think makes a lot of sense. So I think it's risk-based thresholds is the right approach but then you need to ground those in science of what we're actually seeing. So what do we actually have evidence that this is likely to be an actual risk that's going to come from that, and then we should mitigate those appropriately.
Some organizations, I think, are progressive and they're moving beyond just Gen AI and sort of your typical GPT tools to sort of process enhancements and the rest. But I've had many clients where we've had this discussion. What AI are you using? What's your AI policy? And they're like, oh, we're only using GPT, so don't worry. And I'm wondering, should you not be using more at this stage?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think things are evolving so quickly that you should be testing a lot of things, I think, and they work differently in different use cases. And so you should be thinking about those use cases. And one thing I'll say, our perspective on a lot of it coming from Meta is really there's a huge privacy value to the open source model. So one of the unique things about an open source model is you can take our model, you can go run it on your own infrastructure, and you never have to communicate anything back to us. So we never see the data, we never have access to the data. You don't have to rely on a contract to limit our ability to use that data. It's all you and all control. That requires a certain amount of sophistication, but there's lots of vendors out there that are making that easy and stuff. And so, especially as you think about more sensitive data uses, that's something you should be considering. So that should be as you're evaluating different options, that's something you should be thinking about, in addition to just how well do the models perform on the different tasks you want to leverage them for, et cetera.
I suppose just you're thinking about the chemical weapons example and the sort of ways in which AI can be used. There's a flip side to the fact that if there's open source that can then be used in the wild without any feedback loop, I suppose there's some risk in that too for the company that potentially created it in its first instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that goes into our frontier AI framework and how we think about evaluating these models. And so when you think about where we've aligned on in general consensus on how you think about evaluating a model is you look at the uplift from what exists in the ecosystem. So that was Google. That's now the existing models. So if you give some experts or some non-experts, basically, whatever exists today, and then you give them your model and you say, go forth and try and plan something, and you work with a bunch of actual chemical and biological weapons experts that are familiar with the entire supply chain. And then you evaluate were they meaningfully more able to make progress towards that catastrophic outcome? And that's how you think about measuring. And so for an open source model, you need to think about that they are potentially going to further fine tune your model. And so one of the things we do is when we're using our safety fine-tuned model that has a bunch of protections built into it, which we do put in, but we actually test on a model that doesn't have most of those in it. So it is a more helpful model that is less likely to resist those things. And then we make a bunch of best guess assumptions about the types of tools they'll be able to use, the types of pipelines they'll be able to use. But then you also need to take realistic consideration of like, what materials were they going to be able to get? Like what other practical bottlenecks exist? And so, yeah, so definitely the open source piece of it is something we take really seriously and is an important part of the consideration. The flip side, though, is like open source is much safer in a lot of ways because anyone can take it and inspect it and see how it works. And that's something then we can then build into the next generation. There's been a number of security and research papers that have only been able to identify vulnerabilities that exist in all large language models, but because they had access to open source models, they were able to poke and prod them in different ways and understand that that existed in Llama, it existed in OpenAI, it existed in all of them. And so that level of transparency is that's the gold standard within the security community for how you do these things, because it is a radical form of transparency. And so we think that net makes the ecosystem more safe because everyone can really understand how these models are working. And then we can all learn from that and make the models safer over time.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And as you say, the privacy considerations, there is something very important about, as you say, being able to take that open source and make it work in your environment and keep your customers' data in your environment and not worry that it's going back. It does make sense net and a lot of sides. It's just interesting to think about.
For listeners that are out there, they have smaller businesses or they are startups. They don't have big teams. They don't have lots of resources, and they haven't done anything about AI governance yet. What would you suggest as a good approach? Where can they start something that's going to work in the long term as well, not just sort of ticking boxes off? What do you do? What's sort of the top 3 things you can start with?
I think I've given similar advice and seen similar advice in the privacy space as well. It doesn't need to be someone's full-time job, but assign someone to think about it. Give someone the authority to think about how you should use it, think about the type of education, and identify the types of risks you're worried about as a company. And then if you've defined the use spaces you want to use and the risks, how can you mitigate them? And then find solutions that work for that. And I think people should avoid the risk of thinking it's this giant one-size-fits-all decision. AI is a technology. It fits in different ways into all of your different workflows. Some of those workflows are higher risk. Some of them are very, very low risk. And so you should get your feet wet as quickly as possible because there are many ways in which it will make your business more efficient if you find the right ways to deploy it. And it's important to understand it. So take on reasonable pilot programs to solve reasonable use cases, study how they go, and then iterate from there. You don't have to fire your entire company and run it all on AI on day one. I don't think that's it's not the right approach. But identifying some tedious task that everyone in the company hates and seeing if you can make it slightly faster with AI that is not a critical decision-making flow, that'll probably get you a bunch of wins. And I just say, don't bury your head in the sand. If you don't give any guidance, probably everyone's using ChatGPT or Anthropic or Llama or something on another window. And so give realistic guidance. If the thing you're worried about is leaking your customers' data, give clear guidance. Don't copy and paste customer data into a ChatGPT field until we have a contract. But if you want to use it to help you rewrite an email, go for it. Or if you wanted to take bullets and turn that into paragraph form that doesn't have customer data, great.
It's funny. I would almost say there are so many use cases where AI helps us professionals human, if I could put it that way. It's I can't figure out how to say this, or I'm saying this in a way that's too this or to that, and I want it to be firmer, or I want it to be kinder, or I want it to have some humor. And it's hilarious how often I find that's a wonderful use for AI as well.
Yeah, and writing the first draft is hard. But I can write an outline with bullets pretty quickly, and I can edit really well. And like, turns out AI fills in that gap really well. And then like, I may not like its prose. You can revise it. It may get something wrong. It may make things up, but like, it's within that context, like it's introducing very little risk because it's got humans on all sides of it. And it's just trying to make me faster, more articulate, more thorough.
I do want to go back to one question we had on here, Shane, about transparency. You mentioned this at the beginning. We've been talking around, how much there is an overlap between privacy rules and considerations and AI is in some ways just another technology that you should apply all that privacy common sense to as part of its evaluation. So transparency is obviously a key piece of that. I think in a world where a technology is evolving so quickly, transparency can be a little bit complicated. Do you have any advice? I mean, I suppose in some ways it's not complicated. You just say, A, we're using it, and B, this is how we're using it, or this is what we're using it for. But do you have any advice for how companies should be thinking about transparency around their AI usage?
This may not take it exactly where you were thinking, but I can give a pretty interesting concrete example. So I mean, one important thing about transparency is communicating to your audience where they are now. Where they are now in the AI space is changing really quickly. So year and a half ago or so, like, not that it's gone away, but like there was a lot of like the world is going to end because of deep fakes, and it's going to change the US election, and it's going to be this enormous thing. And so there are a lot of concerns. So we invested a bunch in media transparency and labeling things. And so like that conversation has evolved a bunch. Like many of those risks didn't manifest, like still a real concern. You still want to have that. But like in one particular area, one of the things we did is we are working with on developing metadata standards so you can tag images as created with AI or significantly edited with AI. And it turned out one of the implementations of those can actually get really tricky because, people were using Photoshop. Photoshop was using this metadata standard. And if you used a generative AI filter, it would then write to your image that it was edited with AI, that then we would then ingest and say edited with AI. But it turns out I've been using Photoshop for 20 plus years. The difference between a statistical filter, a machine learning filter, sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to what is what. And so there's like a bunch of outrage from the community being like, you're putting this label on my image and I like enhance the colors. Like, what are you talking about? Or there's like, there's a parallel tool that does the same thing that's not an A. Like this it really quickly became meaningless. And so it turns out what people actually want is, am I being deceived by this image? But that is a highly subjective standard. And so you need to be flexible in the approaches we take. 'Cause I think like the conversation is changing very quickly. The expectations are changing very quickly. And you want to be like sensitive and meet people where they are, while recognizing that they may be in a totally different place in 6 months to a year, and societal standards may have evolved around that, and you may need to evolve to match that.
I think that's a very good answer. I think that's my concern. So I'm a business owner, and I've got either internal policies or I've got a privacy policy. I do think it's tricky to keep up with what's the appropriate amount of transparency that's useful and not confusing and accurate. And I'm not saying something that's inaccurate. And maybe there's no easy answer to that. It's just, maybe that one person you designated to think about AI just has a really hard job. But I think, I don't know if either of you two have any thoughts about how to make your way through that.
I mean, some of it I think goes back to the risks, like one of the goals of transparency is to inform people so they can make reasonable decisions about how they engage with you as a business and what you're doing. And so like, are there reasonable things they should know, or are you doing unusual things? Then you have heightened burdens around transparency. But, AI has become a hot word for the last, 2-3 years. We've been using machine learning as driven everything for the last 10 years, and we didn't call it AI because AI had fallen out of fashion. So what do we mean when we say AI? Are we only referring to generative AI? Are we referring to all the other different AI technologies? And if it's just another, technology in the toolkit that is helping you do the basic thing you've always done, then I think like your obligations on disclosures are a lot less, But if there is some additional risk you're creating for your users, then you need to educate them on what those risks might be and what choices and controls they have or what they might want to do.
And I think as with other disclosure duties, often the useful test is the shock test. Will the user get really shocked if they knew that this was happening? And obviously, I guess people get desensitized and some people still get shocked by some things and others don't. But it's one of the questions I think you need to ask is if a user knew about this, how would they feel about that? If they wouldn't feel great about this, maybe we should tell them about this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, and I think, people are interacting with an AI chatbot. They want to know it's an AI chatbot. And that seems like very reasonable and also like very easy to label that as such. Like if you've automated a bunch of back office processes that like, they never knew, your customers never previously knew whether you're using like SAP or AP or like a Workday or like, that's never been something anyone ever disclosed. And so if you're now pulling an AI to like, it doesn't make it, why would you disclose that like your back office processes are being like, it's not relevant to the decisions they're making. And so you need like an internal policy that governs how your employees use it in an appropriate way if there are those types of risks. But you really want to be careful about AI exceptionalism. The counter to the AI exceptionalism is like, it is worth making sure you're not missing things. So in addition to assigning someone to like think about how you want to use it in the right approach, also assign someone to break it. Like red teaming doesn't need to be like an elaborate thing, but like give someone the job of like, what bad things can you do with this? And just like wear that hat for an hour and try and do an ideation on like where the risks to try and make sure you're not missing things. Because you do want to be cautious.
Shane, our company is a fully remote company. We work from all over the world. That's part of our shtick, if you will. You spent a year traveling the world between jobs. How was it? Any tips for anyone who might be interested in the same thing?
Highly recommend. It's really hard to do. My wife and I, we took a year off. It was an amazing experience. It seems crazy, but you can do it. And we were able to find jobs when we came back. Generally, the reception was like, that was such a cool thing you did. And it didn't seem to be a blackball on our resumes or anything like that. So encourage people to explore, but also like, the working remote thing wasn't such an option then. So like there's now a lot more options, I think, too, and how you think about going and doing it.
I also just want to quickly say, when you were talking about using AI for cooking and helping with your sister-in-law visiting, it reminded me that, Shane, you were the first time I ate fresh artichokes was with you, and I still make Brussels sprouts according to the recipe that you made. You did like a maple syrup bacon Brussels sprout situation, and I still make them that way.
Thanks so much, Shane. It's been awesome.
That's it for today's episode of Privacy in Practice, brought to you by VeraSafe.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email to podcast@verasafe.com.
And to learn more about VeraSafe's data protection and privacy services, you can visit us at verasafe.com.